3, 2, 1, 1. Well, this is it. This is where we left the GTO in the last video. We got the engine in, not unconnected, and we don't even know if it starts. But hopefully by the end of today's video, I'll be sat here with a smile on my face because I've put this key in the ignition and it started. But even though the engine's in, there's still a lot to do. But anyway, I think it's time we crack down because it's absolutely freezing and there's a lot to do. So the lifting changed off the engine, and I think the next thing really is to just start plugging stuff in. So now I'm plugging in the coolant temperature sensor, the coolant temperature switch, the ignition coil plugs, the PTU plugs, the wheel speed sensor on the gearbox, the knock sensor, the oil pressure switch, the rear injector plug, the cam position sensor, and the throttle position sensor. So that's most of it connected up. The injectors on the front, these plugs, we are going to have to make this one off because it's damaged. And I think what I'll do is, because I've got 6 new ones, I'll do the front 3. The back 3 were actually okay, so I don't have to do them. But one thing as well is, because this engine's being, well, rebuilt and there's no oil pressure in it, the turbos have no oil, there's no oil around the engine. We'll have to disconnect the injectors to make sure no fueling gets into the engine in case it starts whilst we're turning it over, because what we're going to have to do is, we have to turn it over, let the oil pressure build up within the engine, let it circulate around the turbos and everything else. Then we can plug the injector plugs back in. Then we can try and start it. Because if you try and start it with no oil in it, it may fire up and then everything's running dry for the first few seconds, and you don't want that. So the front injectors are disconnected like you can see, but the rears you can't get to as it is. However, that plug there is what goes to the rear injector, so we'll just unplug that. We'll unplug that, and then when the engine tries to start up, none of the injectors will put fuel in the cylinders. But now most of the electrical connections are plugged in, we need to work on the more mechanical side of things, which is the heater matrix hoses on the back, they need to go in. The vacuum lines, they need to go in, and the shift cables. So we'll get all that plugged in now, and then we'll see what we need to do next. So now the shift cables are in, the next thing to do is the fuel lines here. So this one goes to the top. That is the fuel filter, which goes to this. So I think that's the incoming to the fuel rail at the top of the engine. Don't think you can see it. There it is there. And then when these are connected up, the next thing on the back is the heater matrix hoses. They go up the top. See if I can focus. There they are. And then they also go to the 2 pipes at the back. Then the Jubilee clips need tightening. And then that's them hoses on, and if we don't put them on now, once you fill the car up with coolant, it'll go all over the back of the engine because it won't have anywhere else to go out of those hoses. Oh, and we'll also get the clutch slave cylinder. Is it the slave cylinder? The clutch slave cylinder line plugged into the master cylinder just down there, so then we can fill that and bleed it, and we'll get a clutch. One thing I do know is trying to get a clutch on these GTOs, like good pedal pressure, is quite difficult. I don't know why, but we'll try and get it as best we can. So I'll get all this buttoned up and I'll come back to you when I'm done. That's everything put back on, including the fuel lines, the slave cylinder hose, and the heater matrix hoses on the back. So in terms of the top of the engine, I think that's all the easy stuff plugged in. I'm now at a point where I'm going to have to look up some diagrams online to make sure whatever I plug in the right place. Mainly the vacuum lines, because the vacuum system on this car is quite intricate. If you get it wrong, you'll get vacuum issues, which means you'll get running issues, and we don't want running issues on the first start. And the reason I say the vacuum system on this is quite intricate is because here you have a little vacuum junction block thing. That vacuum goes to your throttle body. That one's from the plenum, again plenum to the brake booster. And then on this side you've got your solenoid for the vacuum, because on your turbos just there, that's a wastegate, which again is actuated by vacuum. Down the bottom down there is a charcoal canister, which again is operated on vacuum for the emissions. And overall, it's just a real pain. So I need to make sure to get it right. Otherwise, I'm going to be chasing my tail with it later. And I really don't want to have to do that. But another thing we can do, which I've just realised, is on this side of the engine, like most of the bits, down there, this is your power steering fluid reservoir. It was for the rear wheel steer as well, but I've just looped that so it doesn't go to the back. And this pipe goes down the back to this, which is the power steering pump. So the power steering pump there, that hose goes to the reservoir, and that one down there goes to the power steering pump with a bolt, so we can get them on so when we fill it with fluid it doesn't leak everywhere, because I forgot to connect them up. It's quite a tight space, so I'll do it off camera and I'll come back to you when I've got it on. Well, that took a lot longer than I'm proud to admit, but I finally got the power steering hoses all connected down the bottom there, so all that's plugged in. It's into the reservoir. While I was there, I put the vacuum booster in for the cruise control module, which sits there. That's it on the floor, so we'll get that in soon enough. So now it's just a case of figuring out where these vacuum lines go, so I'll have to review the diagrams. And when I found the diagrams, I'll come back to you and I'll try and show you what it is I found in case you're having vacuum issues on your GTO as well. So luckily enough, the hoses that were on the car were already resting in the positions where they wanted to be. So this solenoid and this solenoid both operate separately, of course. The rear turbo wastegate and the front turbo wastegate. There should be another solenoid there for the EGR valve. This is the diagram I found online, and it's the only one I could relate it to the system I've got by looking at it, because there were a few GTOs with a few different engines, and a few different countries have different regulations when it comes to emissions and all that jazz, which vastly affects the vacuum system. But anyway, that's what I used. It's all plugged in. I think it's all right, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's not. That one is the only one that's not plugged in. That's because that goes to the blower valve, which goes under the airbox. And this one here, again, is for the EGR, I believe. So that goes through, round, and into the throttle body. But that's relevant at the minute. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get the coolant pipes put on, and then I'm going to start to slowly put on the charge pipes for the turbos, the intake side. And then hopefully everything should start falling into place, and we're getting that a little bit closer to seeing if it'll start. Oh, we've also got to put fluids in because the engine's got no oil in it at the minute. One thing I don't understand about the UK is how it can be cracking the flags 1 minute and then absolutely lashing it down the next. But anyway, that's enough for the weather report. I think it's time to get the boost hoses on. Tell you what, there's a lot of hoses on that turbo system. I know it's a twin intercooler, but Jesus Christ. Also, it's going dark outside, so that took me ages. But there's the engine bay, looking pretty full to say the least. So obviously there's the intakes coming in into your throttle body and then all the way out to the intercooler on one side and the intercooler on another. The next thing will fit the oil cooler because that goes on this side. And if it don't fit that now, I'll forget. I'll fill the engine with oil, try and start it, and the oil will go everywhere. So let's get it on. And that is the oil cooler on, all bolted up. I've also lifted the GTO, so it's currently on axle stands again. But it's getting quite late and it's quite cold in the unit. So I think what we're going to do next is probably just... It's also quite windy. We're going to fill the engine with oil so don't forget to do it tomorrow. Give the place a clean because it is disgustingly dirty in here. The other side is exactly the same. But yeah, let's get some engine oil in the engine. So now the engine's full of oil, I'll check back with you tomorrow when it's not ridiculously cold and we're ready for the first start. Oh, and the unit should be a lot cleaner than this. So I'll see you tomorrow. It's now the next day, I'm all fresh and clean, so let's get down the unit and get this car started. So you might not be able to hear me because the road noise in the TT is quite bad, but anyway, let's go over what we need to do today. So today we need to fill the gearbox because there's no oil in that. That's the same for the transfer case, but you fill that before you put the drive shaft in. You need to put the drive shaft on. You need to fit the exhaust which I actually bought in my second ever YouTube video, which was around about November 2023, I think it was. So I'll fit that. I think that's a full tie system, but it's catless. Straight down to the back box. It's essentially a straight pipe, but it's being done properly, so I'm curious to see what that actually sounds like on the V6. We also need to fit the passenger side drive shaft from the gearbox, which mounts to the engine, so we can get the end couplers on after the fact. That's not a big issue. It's just so when we start it up with the oil in the gearbox sloshing around, it'll leak unless it's plugged in, which is with the drive shaft, so we need to get them in as well. And I'm struggling to think of anything else that we need to get on. I think that's literally it. Fill the car up with petrol, which I haven't done for a while, and that's it. And then we can turn the key and see if it blows up. Yeah, love the way the turbo sounds on this car. So the first thing I've done, just to make things a little bit easier, is I've took the wheels off the GTO. Because the unit, again, is still a mess. So, you know what, actually, we'll clean that first. And that is so much better. And now that I've got the wheels off, I've also noticed on this side, which it has happened before. So if you click on that video up there, you'll see it. But this wheel bearing is actually loose again. And if you see it from the back, if I can get round, it does wobble. Now that does seem a lot worse than it actually is, but all it means is the drive shaft that goes through the wheel bearing that the hub is on is a compression fit. So when the drive shaft goes in, there's a nut on the opposite side and it bites and pulls the hub together. Because the drive shafts haven't been in and we've been turning the car to move it about, it's given it space to wobble, and that's why it's come loose. So when we get that off to get the drive shafts in, we'll pinch it all back together and we should be okay. But while we're on the topic of drive shaft, this is a drive shaft that mounts to the engine there and goes into the gearbox down there. Try and show you down the back. So there's that hole. That's where it goes into, right at the back. So we need to get that in before we fill the gearbox. Because if we don't and we fill the gearbox, all the oil will probably come out that hole, and then you might as well just put it on the floor at that point. So I'm going to put some grease on the end of that shaft. It's literally 2 bolts that bolt to the block. And then that will be on there. I'm going to do it off camera just because it's easier, but I'll try and show you as much as I can. And if we get under the car, you'll see right down the back, there's the hole. And then when you come across, there's the 2 bolts that it bolts onto. That's all it is. So that's on now. It's all bolted up. The next thing I've done is I've just loosened the nut off the ball joint and knocked it to separate the lower control arm from the hub, just so we can sway it across. Then we can get the drive shaft in from there through into the hub, get that bolted back up, and the drive shaft should pinch that back together. So now the shaft's in on the gearbox side, I'm going to clean up the reluctor ring for the ABS with a wire brush because it's quite rusty, and then put a bit of grease on the shaft before I stick it into the hub. And yes, I'm aware the ABS possibly might not work, but the car's that old, I didn't expect it to anyway. Now this is the drive shaft nut that I was on about, so as I'm tightening this nut against the drive shaft, it should squeeze the hub back together and stop the play within the wheel bearing. And then you stick a cotter pin in, make sure the nut doesn't back itself off as the wheels are rotating. That's that side fully knitted together, and I'll go do the opposite side off camera. So that's that side now done as well, with the drive shaft in and all that good stuff. So the next thing is the transfer case, along with the prop shaft, which goes down the middle, and then the exhaust, and I'm curious to see what that sounds like. Prop shaft goes under there, right the way back to the diff. I think you can see it there. But as you can see, the hole under the side of the car is being completely undersealed. That took me a long time to do, but the transfer case bolts on there to that output shaft. The prop shaft then goes from that straight down to the diff. And the prop shaft, the way it works is this end shaft there goes inside the output of the transfer case. It then gets bolted up on that bracket and that bracket, and those 4 bolts bolt to the diff. Because that's literally it and that's all you do, I'm going to do that off camera because the access under the car isn't great. I barely fit under there, never mind with a tripod. But hopefully in the future when we get ramps, all that good stuff I can show you. But at the minute it's a bit awkward, so I'll get that in and then we'll move on to the exhaust. So that was quite difficult. I've also got a lot more buttoned up under the car. For example, the brace bar on the passenger and the driver's side both in. The centre section of the exhaust is in. I say centre from the manifolds down. The prop shaft is in all the way back to the diff. That's all bolted up. I was going to fit the full exhaust before the first start, but it is getting dark and it is getting late, so I just want to get it started now, to be honest with you. So I think that's exactly what we're going to do next. Actually, I'll get the wheels on first and we'll get the car on the floor. Now the car's down, the next thing we need to do is get a battery on it. I'm not going to put the battery in the car just in case anything happens. What I'll do is I'll connect it with a few jump leads. That way if anything goes wrong, I can disconnect it quickly. Well, we have power. The fans have kicked in. Let's have a look on the inside. Yeah, everything's coming on. Well, that's why the fans are on. Let's turn this off. Let's turn the fans off. Here's the dash on. Dash is now on. Actually quite scared. Hopefully nothing blows up. We do need to build oil pressure in the engine first though, so we need to turn it over whilst the injectors are disconnected. Then we can put fuel in it. Then we can try and start it. Let's see if it turns over. Do it again just so we don't burn the starter out. Now I think for the first start we'll actually put the battery on just because I don't want to put that much stress through the jump leads, and it's quite a big engine so it takes a fair bit through the battery. So let's get that in and connected properly. So now we've got the battery in, I've reconnected the rear injector plug and I've connected the front 3 injectors. So all we need to do now is put fuel in the back and see if it starts. So now that the fuel tank's full of fuel, we need to turn the engine on to try and prime the pump. Again, the fan's come back on. I need to figure out why it keeps doing that. Turn that off. Doesn't sound like the fuel pump's going actually. So now after all these years, let's see if it starts. I don't know why, but it just wouldn't start. Well, that didn't work. Yeah, didn't start. But one thing I've noticed though, which is a bit odd because it should, when you put the key in the ignition, like so, and turn it on, you should hear a hum. And when you hear a hum, that usually means it's coming from the back, from the fuel pump. But I can't hear no hum, so I'm suspecting maybe the engine's not getting fuel because, well, if the pump's not on, it's not sending fuel to the front of the car. The engine's never going to start without petrol. So I'm thinking I might pull that cover off and see what's going on with the fuel pump. That's that off. Yes, the fuel pump does look a bit crusty, but I have gone through this and I've cleaned everything. And it's plugged in, so everything looks right here, so I don't think it's back here. But one thing I do know about the GTOs is there's a way to test the fuel pump in the engine bay, and the way you do that is with these down here. So if you have a GTO and you come to where your battery is, down in this corner here you have these little plugs. I think the blue one is for ignition timing, the black one is what we want, that's to test your fuel pump. There's a brown one down there. I don't really know what it does. I might be getting that and the blue one confused. But I know for a fact we need the black one because that tests your fuel pump. So what you do is put a connector in there, take it straight to the 12 volt positive on the battery, and you should hear the pump hum in the boot. And that wire goes directly to the fuel pump from the engine bay. So if you don't hear the pump hum, we know the pump's dead. If you do hear the pump hum, we need to come further back to see why the pump isn't getting power when the ignition's turned on. So like I said, we'll get the black cable out. There's a little cover connector on the top, which is that's just plastic. We'll take that off. And then this is like a little tester cable I made to do windows on cars, you know, 3 to 12, get it up. Anyway, get this in the front of the black connector. Then this goes directly to the battery positive. And if it works, we should hear a hum. Now I can hear a hum, which is good, but I don't think you can. So I'll put it in the boot and I'll show you. So you're at the back of the car now. I'll go do that cable and you'll hear it hum. Which is good because that tells me the fuel pump's working. So in that case, we need to figure out why the fuel pump isn't getting sent 12 volts when the ignition turns on. There's only one place I can think of. Oh no, I lied. There's 2 places where I can think that happens before it gets to the fuel pump. One of which is down there behind that trim, which is called your MFI relay or multi-fuel injection relay. And the other place, move my test wire out the way, is that little black box. That is your starter relay. So when you turn the car on, it goes through those pins and it tells the pump when it's running and when it's trying to prime. But I bought that starter relay off a running car, so I'm pretty confident that that's okay. So I don't think that's the issue. And right now, I don't really want to pull the carpets up to figure out why the MFI relay isn't going in. But what we can do is we'll send the 12 volts to the pump directly and we'll try and start the car. And if the engine starts, then maybe that's the issue. Actually, that's definitely the issue. The engine's not getting fuel and we know that. Let's use the little wire, jump the fuel pump, see if it starts, and hopefully we don't cause a fire. So get that in there. For safety, I'm going to use jump leads because I need to leave it on. So get the jump lead on the 12 volts for the battery, jump lead on this, and hear the fuel pump priming. Let's go turn the ignition on. Moment of truth. Ooh. Let's try again. Why is it coming in then? Last chance. So the engine's starting. Sounds pretty strong, but it's not staying on. Now the only thing I can think of is that relay is a changeover relay. So what that means is it primes the engine by turning the fuel pump on when the key's turned on, but then after that it switches over and tells the engine you're running, pump the fuel properly. But I bought that relay off a running car and I knew the car was running. That's why I bought the relay. The only thing I can think of is when I first picked this car up, it would not start, and it was that relay, funnily enough. But ooh, I might still have it. So, just for context, in here is all my GTO crap. It's all the bolts and everything I've got spare. There it is. I made this little jump lead and I used it to jump that starter relay. So I suppose we've got nothing to lose by doing the same thing on this, and hopefully that might keep it running. But I know last time it was a bit dodgy, so if it does run, I'm not going to run it for long. But might as well try. Last time was, let me just pull that off. There's the relay. They do look a bit crusty actually. Anyway, there's the relay, that's the plug. What I did was those top and bottom pins, I jumped them with this little jumper, and you can see by the arc in it kind of still fits. Let's try and get it on. Like that. So I jumped it like that, and that managed to get the car to run and to stay running. So I'll get it back on the stand. I'll do the same thing with the fuel pump wire in. See if it starts. I mean, it sounded pretty strong initially anyway, which I made up with because it hasn't gone boom yet. But if this doesn't work, the next thing we'll check, or we would have to check, is the MFI relay, and that's on the inside of the car. I've got to pull all the carpets up, so I kind of hope it's this. So that's plugged in. That is now plugged in. The fuel pump's going. 3, 2, 1. No. Now it's not starting at all. Let me check that jumper. Oh, it's the two outer ones, the bigger ones I think I jumped last time. Try that. So the fuel pump's going again. 3, 2, 1, 1. Starts. So it must be that start relay that's causing the issues. I now need to get another one. But I don't know if you saw then, when I pulled the key off the ignition, the engine was still running, and I think that's because that relay is still sending power to the fueling system, which is keeping the car on, which means it's still gonna run, but it starts. So the past 3 years of rebuilding this car and the past year of rebuilding that engine all led up to this point, and yes, the starter relay did kind of mess it up a little bit, but it runs and it sounds fantastic. So I can't wait to get the exhaust on, run it properly, and eventually take it for the first drive. And although that engine bay is absolutely crammed, that sounds to me like we put everything back in the right place and everything starts as it should, minus that stupid starter relay. But I'll give you one more start because 1, I want to hear it myself, and 2, I'll let it run for a little bit longer. We can't run it to temp because there's no coolant in it. But we'll run it for a little bit longer just to see if everything still sounds healthy. I'm over the moon with that. Let's start again. Well, that's going to be it for this video, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, especially if you like what you see, because a lot of work's gone into this engine. And if you want to see how we rebuilt it, click on the top right hand corner now to watch the playlist and see it all through. But again, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Do you lie awake at night? Are you afraid to turn out the lights? Is there